Before this war, before the missiles, before the proxy armies and the assassinations and the nuclear standoff and the direct strikes, Iran and Israel were not enemies. They were partners, close, active, strategically intimate partners. Iran supplied Israel's oil. Israel helped train Iran's intelligence services. They had official ambassadors in each other's capitals. Israeli agricultural experts taught Iranian farmers. Iranian oil kept Israeli industry running. And according to Brookings Institution, this was not a brief, casual arrangement. It lasted for nearly 30 years. 30 years of quiet, consequential friendship. And then one event in 1979 didn't just end that friendship, it inverted it. It turned the closest partner Israel had in the Muslim world into its most dangerous declared enemy on earth. I'm going to take you through every major chapter of this 70-year story, from the handshakes to the missiles. And I'm going to show you the pattern underneath the history, because once you see the pattern, the current war makes a different kind of sense. And I'll tell you something about how this conflict began that most people covering the 2026 war have completely overlooked. Welcome. If you want to understand Iran versus Israel, not just the current headlines, but the actual 70-year arc that produced this war, this is the video you've been looking for. We are going to move fast, because 70 years of history requires pace. But we are not going to skip the parts that matter. Let's go. The year is 1948. The state of Israel has just declared independence. The Arab states surrounding it immediately go to war to destroy it. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, all Arab, all hostile. Israel, in its first hours of existence, is fighting for survival against a coalition of neighbors that want it gone. In this environment, Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, developed a foreign policy framework that historians call the Periphery Doctrine. The logic was simple. If you're surrounded by hostile Arab neighbors, make friends with the non-Arab states on the outside of that ring, the periphery, Turkey, Ethiopia, and Iran. According to historical analysis published by JSTOR and confirmed by Brookings Institution, Iran was central to this periphery strategy from the very beginning. And on March 6, 1950, according to the Middle East Institute, the Iranian government granted Israel de facto recognition, making Iran one of the very first Muslim-majority states in the world to formally acknowledge Israel's existence. Turkey had done so in 1949. Iran followed in 1950. Diplomatic contacts began. Ambassadors were exchanged. Trade started flowing. And for the next 29 years, while Egypt was threatening Israel, while Syria was at war with it, while Jordan and Iraq were officially hostile, Iran and Israel were quietly, substantially cooperating. Iran provided Israel with oil, a commodity Israel desperately needed and could not easily source from Arab neighbors. Israel provided Iran with agricultural technology, military training, and intelligence cooperation. According to Brookings, the Israeli Mossad even helped train Savaquite, the Shah's feared secret police. These were not superficial exchanges. They were deep, functional, strategically valuable ties. And here is the detail that almost never makes it into coverage of the current conflict, because it is genuinely surprising and it changes the texture of the story. According to Le Monde's historical reporting, even after 1979, even after the Islamic Revolution, Israel briefly continued to support the new Islamic Republic in its early years, before the hostility became total. The depth of the pre-revolution relationship had created institutional ties that didn't vanish overnight. This is the lost chapter of this story. Before there was the most dangerous rivalry in the Middle East, there was one of the most productive partnerships. And that matters, not as nostalgia, but because it tells you something about the contingency of this conflict. This was not inevitable, it was made. So what made it? The answer is one man, one moment, and one ideology. His name was Ruhollah Khomeini. The moment was February 1979. And the ideology was political Islam, fused with an explicit existential hostility toward what Khomeini called the Zionist entity. Before 1979, Iran under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was secular, modernizing, pro-Western, and quietly pragmatic about Israel. In 1979, the Shah was overthrown in a popular revolution, the Islamic Revolution, which according to Britannica resulted in the fall of the Pahlavi dynasty and the establishment of an Islamic Republic. Khomeini returned from exile in France and immediately transformed every dimension of Iranian foreign policy. He severed all diplomatic ties with Israel. According to documented historical accounts, the Israeli embassy in Tehran was handed over to the Palestine Liberation Organization and became the PLO's representative office. Death to Israel, in Persian, Marj Bar Ezrael, was not just a political slogan. It was woven into state ceremonies, into school curricula, into the Friday prayers broadcast on state television. It became, quite literally, doctrine. And that doctrine has defined every year of Iranian foreign policy from 1979 to this moment in 2026. But, and this is the thing you need to understand about how Iran actually fights, the Islamic Republic did not primarily choose direct military confrontation with Israel. Not at first, not for decades. Instead, Iran chose a far more sophisticated strategy: proxy warfare. And the first and most consequential instrument of that strategy was born in 1982. That year, Israel invaded Lebanon to destroy the Palestinian Liberation Organization's military infrastructure there, and Iran's Revolutionary Guards seized the opportunity. According to the Iran Primer, and confirmed by Brookings and the Middle East Institute, Iran's IRGC helped organize, fund, train, and arm a new Lebanese Shiite militant organization, Hezbollah, the Party of God. From the very beginning, Hezbollah was designed as Iran's forward military position against Israel, a permanent armed force on Israel's northern border that could strike Israeli cities, tie down Israeli military resources, and provide Iran with a tool of influence that didn't require Iran to fire a single missile from its own territory. According to Brookings, Hezbollah became, quote, the most successful and the most deadly export of the 1979 Iranian Revolution. That assessment was written before October 7, 2023. It remains accurate. Through the late 1980s and 1990s, Iran expanded its network of proxies further. Hamas was founded in 1987 during the First Palestinian Intifada, the popular uprising against Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. Iran began providing Hamas with funding, weapons, and training, even though Hamas is a Sunni organization and Iran is predominantly Shia. The ideology of anti-Israel resistance bridged that theological divide. According to the Wilson Center, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei himself said, quote, "We regard Palestine as an organ of our body." Iran also built relationships with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, with Houthi militants in Yemen, and with Shiite militias in Iraq. By the early 2000s, what Iranian strategists and international analysts called the axis of resistance was a functioning reality, a network of armed groups on Israel's borders and in the surrounding region, all funded and supplied by Tehran, all pointed at Jerusalem. This was Iran's strategic architecture for fighting Israel without going to war directly. And for 3 decades, it worked. It kept Iran out of direct military exposure while keeping Israel in a state of permanent, costly, exhausting conflict on multiple fronts. But underneath the proxy war, a second and ultimately more decisive conflict was developing: Iran's nuclear program. According to congressional research from the Library of Congress, Israel's intelligence services detected Iranian efforts to develop a military nuclear industry as far back as the mid-1990s. Iran's secret uranium enrichment facilities in Natanz and Iraq were revealed to the world in 2002 by an Iranian opposition group. And from that moment, the nuclear dimension transformed the entire Israel-Iran confrontation. For Israel, a nuclear-armed Iran was not merely a strategic threat. It was an existential one, because Iran's leadership had stated explicitly, repeatedly, and on the record that Israel should not exist. In October 2005, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, speaking at a conference, quoted Khomeini and declared that Israel, in his words, must be wiped off the map. The New York Times reported on the speech the following day, calling it an outrage that shook the international community. Israel and the United States began intensifying their efforts to prevent Iran from acquiring the nuclear capability to match that rhetoric. Those efforts included one of the most remarkable covert operations in modern history. In 2010, a computer worm called Stuxnet was discovered operating inside Iran's nuclear centrifuge facilities at Natanz. According to Wikipedia and extensive reporting by PBS and NPR, Stuxnet widely attributed to a joint USS. Israeli operation was specifically designed to cause Iran's uranium enrichment centrifuges to spin at incorrect speeds, physically destroying them while reporting normal operation to the monitoring systems. Approximately 1,000 Iranian centrifuges were destroyed. Stuxnet is widely considered the first true cyber weapon deployed as an act of warfare in history. It set Iran's nuclear program back by an estimated 2 years. Israel also conducted a campaign of targeted assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists between 2010 and 2012. According to the Iran Primer, Israel has been linked to at least a dozen attacks on Iran's nuclear program since 2010. At least 4 scientists were killed during that period in operations that Iran attributed to the Mossad. This was warfare conducted in the shadows, no declarations, no press conferences, no admission of responsibility. Just dead scientists and destroyed centrifuges. Stop and hold that image for a moment, because what you are watching across this entire period, from Hezbollah in 1982 to Hamas in the 1990s to Stuxnet in 2010 to the assassinations, is a conflict being deliberately waged below the threshold that would trigger a direct military confrontation. Both sides understood, implicitly, that full-scale war was a line neither was ready to cross. Iran fought through proxies. Israel fought through sabotage and covert operations. It was a war without a declaration, a conflict without a formal battlefield. And it lasted for more than 40 years in this form, until 2024, when the threshold finally broke. In 2015, there was a brief, fragile attempt to resolve at least the nuclear dimension through diplomacy. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, was negotiated by the Obama administration along with Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and China. Under the deal, Iran agreed to limit its uranium enrichment and open its facilities to international inspectors in exchange for sanctions relief. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu opposed the deal passionately. He flew to Washington and addressed a joint session of the USS Congress to argue against it. But the deal held for 3 years. In 2018, President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the JCPOA, reimposed sanctions, and Iran, freed from its commitments, resumed and accelerated its enrichment program. By 2025, as noted in earlier research, Iran had enriched uranium to 60% purity, with a stockpile of nearly 1,000 pounds. The window for a diplomatic resolution closed, and the escalatory cycle that led directly to the current war began. The triggering event for the final sequence was October 7, 2023. Hamas launched a massive ground attack from Gaza into southern Israel, the largest attack on Israeli soil since the founding of the state, killing approximately 1,200 people, according to the New York Times. The New York Times also reported that Iran was aware of Hamas's plan before it was launched. The Washington Post reported that Iran had provided Hamas with weapons and training in the lead-up to the attack. Hamas had tried, according to a separate NYT investigation based on secret documents, to persuade Iran to join the attack directly. Iran declined direct involvement but did not stop it. The aftermath engulfed the entire region. Israel launched a ground and air campaign in Gaza. Hezbollah opened a second front from Lebanon. Houthi militants in Yemen began attacking Israeli shipping in the Red Sea. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria struck U.S. forces across the region. The axis of resistance that Iran had spent 40 years building was fully activated, and it produced the most dangerous escalatory sequence in the conflict's history. On April 13, 2024, for the first time in the entire history of the Iran-Israel conflict, Iran attacked Israel directly from Iranian soil. According to Wikipedia, and confirmed by the Times of Israel, Iran fired approximately 170 drones, more than 30 cruise missiles, and more than 120 ballistic missiles at Israeli territory. 320 total projectiles. Israel, with support from the United States, Jordan, and other allies, intercepted the overwhelming majority. Minor damage, few casualties. But the psychological and strategic threshold crossed was enormous. For the first time in 45 years of conflict, Iran had abandoned the Proxy Doctrine and attacked Israel directly. On October 1, 2024, Iran did it again, this time firing approximately 200 ballistic missiles at Israel, the largest single missile barrage in the history of this conflict to that point. According to the Wall Street Journal, These two direct attacks in 2024 showed Israel that it could withstand Iranian bombardment and simultaneously gave Israel's military establishment the data it needed to plan a decisive preemptive response. That response came on June 13, 2025. Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a massive strike campaign against Iranian nuclear facilities, ballistic missile sites, and energy infrastructure. According to Wikipedia, the 12-day war lasted from June 13 to June 24, 2025. Iran fired 550 ballistic missiles in response. 86% were intercepted. 28 people were killed despite that interception rate, a number that, as we covered in the previous video, should tell you everything you need to know about the danger of the remaining 14%. Israel's government declared a historic victory. Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel had removed two existential threats. Iran agreed to a ceasefire after 12 days. And then, as you now know from earlier in this series, Iran spent the next 8 months rebuilding, reconstituting, and expanding its arsenal, until February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched Operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion together, killing Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and triggering the full-scale war we are currently inside. So, let's step back and look at the full 70-year arc. Because there is a pattern here that explains not just how we got to this war, but where it is going. The pattern is escalation in one direction, with each episode more severe than the last. Iran provides the ideology: destroy Israel. Israel responds with covert deterrence, Stuxnet, assassinations, targeted strikes. Iran escalates its proxy network. Hezbollah gets more rockets, Hamas gets more weapons, the Houthis get ballistic missiles. Israel escalates its covert operations. Iran crosses a new threshold, direct missile strikes in 2024, the first in history. Israel responds with a massive preemptive campaign in 2025. Iran reconstitutes. America joins. And the supreme leader of Iran is killed for the first time in the Islamic Republic's 46-year history. Each step in this sequence was a response to the step before it, and each step raised the stakes higher than anything that had come before. But actually, the most important thing to understand about this pattern is not where it has been, it is where it can still go. Because despite everything, despite the assassinated scientists, the destroyed centrifuges, the two direct missile exchanges in 2024, the 12-day war of 2025, and the current full-scale conflict, Iran has never used a nuclear weapon, because it does not yet have one. The entire arc of this conflict from 1979 to today has been about one question: will Iran acquire nuclear weapons? And every covert operation, every proxy war, every military strike, every diplomatic negotiation, every assassination, every UN veto, every sanctions regime has been, at its core, an attempt to answer that question with a no. Whether the current war finally settles that question, one way or the other, is the central historical question of our moment. Here is what you need to hold on to as you follow this story going forward. This conflict between Iran and Israel is not fundamentally about territory, as most Middle East conflicts are. It is about existence. Iran's leadership has stated since 1979 that Israel should not exist. Israel's security establishment has believed, since the mid-1990s, that an Iran with nuclear weapons represents a threat to its own existence. Two states. Both convince the other represents an existential threat, a 70-year arc of escalating conflict. And right now, in March 2026, they are in direct, full-scale war for the first time, with the United States fighting alongside Israel and Russia, feeding intelligence to Iran. The stakes of this moment are not regional, they are historic, and you now know the full story of how we got here. If this breakdown served you, share it with someone who has been watching the headlines without the history. Because the headlines only make sense if you know the 70 years that produced them. The next video in this series examines the one question that all of this history has been building toward: can this war end? And if so, on whose terms and at what cost? That video is next. Stay close.